Welcome back to the second recording of C programming. In this video, I will talk about what the C program code should have and the basics of it. Now, in every C programming code, you start with hash include stdio.h. Now, what is stdio.h? It's actually a header file that's in your compiler. The full name is standard input output. Without this, there's no input and output available in your program. This should always be the first line of your code. And next, int main. In every C programming code, the main function is the most important function. Second line is usually made using int main. Now, I'll explain more on this in upcoming videos, but right now, just remember, right after the second line, right after the first line of include stdio.h is always int main. Then you have open curly braces. Now, in here, in this whole space in between, is the set of codes that you would like to write for your program. And then when you're done with it, you put a return 0. And close the curly brace. And then you're done. You're done with your first program with the set of instructions inside here. Now, just remember the flow of the program is like this. Include stdio.h, int main, open curly brace, your code inside, return 0, and close curly brace. Now I'll explain more about the set of commands and set of codes that you can input in here. Alright, now I would introduce you to data types. In C programming, there are a lot of data types. Now, we use data types to usually create variables. First data type I would like to introduce is int. Now, what happens if I write int x in the program? It actually means I'm creating a box somewhere inside the memory. The name of the variable is x, and what it can store in here is integer. It can only store integer, hence the name int. Now let's say x can store 0 or 1 up to infinity, as long as it's integer without any fractions inside. And it can only store a number, only one. It can store 5, it can store 10, it can store 12, but it cannot store 3 at the same time. Remember that. Now next, I would introduce float. Float x means I'm creating a box which name is still x. It can store a float. Now, what is a float? A float is a number which has decimals. Let's say 0.9, 10.2, 15.4, and so on and so forth. That is float. Next, I'll introduce you to double. Now, what this line of code means is I'm creating a box. The name is y. Sorry. And the data type is double. Double is essentially the same as float. Just think of double as the big brother of float. It can store a higher maximum value, and a lower minimum value compared to float. Now the other fundamental data type is character. Character A, what it means is that I'm creating a box whose name is A, and I can store a character. Now, char A doesn't mean that the value in this box is A. It's still empty. I haven't assigned a value to it. It can store alphabets from A to Z, any special characters like hash, comma, so on and so forth. This is what is known as char. Now, with these fundamental data types that you have just learned, I will go on next on how to assign a value to them. Let's say you feel like creating an integer called num1. I have created a box whose name is num1 and it stores an integer. Now next, how do I put in a value to it? How do I assign a value? Well, there are two ways to get a value for that. Number one is to assign a value to it. Number two is to gather input from user. Now let's talk about the first one first. Now to assign a value to num1, we'll just put num1 is equals to 5. With this, we're assigning the value of num1. It will retain the value of 5 over here. This is what happens in your RAM memory space. 5 is inside num1. So if you were to ask the computer, what's the value of num1? It'll return as 5. Now, remember, this equal sign means assignment. You cannot write it like this. You can't say num1 is equal to 5. It must be the other way around. So please don't get confused with this one. Number 2, gather input from user. Now I won't teach you how to gather input from user. I'll just tell you the basics of it as how it works. Now example, you want to know the age of a certain user. Probably you're a machine which wants to check if the user is eligible for a movie. So you ask the user to enter his or her age, and he or she enters 12. What happens is that you have a 12 in here then. These are the two ways of how to assign values to integer.